Thank you for joining us today. My name's Darlene McLennan, for those who haven't met me before. I'm the manager of the Australian Disability Clearinghouse on Education and Training, ADCET for short. Before I do an introduction to our speaker and talk a little bit about the session, we are having this event live captioned. So if you haven't used Zoom before and require captions, please click on the CC button in the toolbar that is located either at the top or bottom of your screen. We also have captions available by a browser, and we'll put the link now into the chat box. I want to start by acknowledging that I'm coming to you from Lutruwita, Aboriginal land, sea and waterways. And I want to acknowledge with deep respect the traditional custodians of this land, on which I am, with the Palawa people. I stand for a future that proudly respects and recognises Aboriginal perspectives, culture, language and history, and a continued effort for fight for Aboriginal justice and rights, paving a way for a strong future. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are working today, and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait people who are participating in this webinar. This session, we hope to have it fairly interactive through our chat box. So what I'd like to encourage you now is, if you're aware of the lands on which you are today, please add that to the chat box. And also say hello and where you're working, because it'd be great to kind of see and chat with each other to kind of get some conversation going. Okay, our presenter today is a wonderful friend of ADCET, Brandon Taylor. Brandon has done a number of things for us and has been really supportive of our work. Brandon also spoke at our Pathways conference, which was done in partnership with the Australian Tertiary Education Network on Disability, and I encourage you all to look up Brandon's presentation on the presentations on the Attend website, because they were wonderful, interactive and engaging presentations. Brandon is currently the mental health and wellbeing strategy manager for TAFE Queensland, and prior to this he was the student support manager serving the Brisbane region for TAFE Queensland. For today's session, we're really looking forward to Brandon guiding us through the successful reasonable adjustments training he has delivered to educators at TAFE Queensland. Brandon also spoke at a presentation we gave, or meeting we gave, for new practitioners in the sector, and that's where we heard about Brandon's session around reasonable adjustments, and then kind of said, could he please present on the topic, because we knew it would be a hot topic. And it was, because we actually had 180 people register to attend or receive the webinar of this, receive the recording of this presentation afterwards. Sorry if I'm a bit garbled today. I'm very tired. I've actually had 2 weeks with my 2-year-old granddaughter, and I'm feeling today that my age, she's worn me out. Before we go over to Brandon, I just want to provide another few more housekeeping details. We are recording this session, and the recording will go on ADCET in the coming days. If you have any difficulties technically, please email us on admin@adcet.edu.au. As I said, we want to make this interactive. We will be doing polls and we will be asking questions at the end of this session. So if you have any questions while the session is happening, please put them into the chat pod, and I will ask them at the end of the session, or we can also ask people to raise their hands, turn their video and ask the questions if people are comfortable doing that, being aware that we are recording. All right, so thank you for joining us, and thank you, Brandon, for sharing your wisdom with us today. And thank goodness you can talk, because I can't. All right, over to you.
Darlene, thank you very much. And yes, I really appreciate the welcome, and good afternoon, everybody. First of all, let me acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where I am today, here in South Brisbane, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Wow, 180 registrations. Well, that's quite something, isn't it? And it clearly shows what a hot topic reasonable adjustment is. So I appreciate that some of you will be well and truly across this. This resource that we'll work through and I'll present today very much came from conversations with teachers and lecturers and industry trainers that we have across TAFE Queensland, and the team that look after professional development for all of those people. We call that educator capability. And I think it's important to remember that while some of us work in this space day to day, it's our more comfortable place in comparison to a lot of other teaching staff. So let's get underway. We'll have some time for some Q&A. I know some questions have been sent through, and let's see what we can cover. And of course, some of you will be looking at this, thinking about how you might want to tweak it, develop it, or take it into your own organisation. We're going to start with a poll. Just to poll one, please, just to give me a little idea of the audience. So it's a simple question. I'm interested to know, have you delivered any training to the teaching and lecturing staff at your organisation? Have you delivered any training about reasonable adjustment previously? And your options are yes to many, yes but need more staff to participate, yes but not recently, no but would like to, and no, have not yet planned to do so. So if you could use that poll for me, please, just to quickly get an idea of our participants today. And we'll let that run for a moment and just get a sense of where we're actually at. And I can see the participant numbers are increasing. So guys, if you've just joined, hopefully you can see that poll, just giving us a sense of whether you've delivered any reasonable adjustment training recently, whether you just started that journey or you're hoping to do so. Okay. Can I get those poll results as that currently stands? So we've got almost, well, just over 100 people in the room now. And wow, okay. So we've got 35% and we're just over 100 attendees. 35% no, have not delivered any training to teaching staff, but would like to do so. And also another 24% no, have not yet planned to do so. And it's 9% and 11% have done it recently, but would like more to engage. Wow, okay, all right. Well, hopefully this is going to give you something to work with. And look, I'm always intrigued to find out a little bit more about the audience. So here's a really important question for you. Could I have poll 2, please? Because poll 2 really gives me a little insight into you as an individual. So guys, this is absolutely critical. If you could have only one type of biscuit, what would that biscuit be? Is it a chocolate chip cookie? Is it a custard cream? Is it a shortbread? Is it a plain rich tea? Are you a McVitie's hobnob person, or are you more of a cheese and cracker person? We've got over 100 participants, and you know, I'm going to make some assumptions about my audience, because when I was a teacher, we lived on biscuits between classes. I'm not going to give you very long with this one. It's just to lighten the mood in what's been the very end of a very busy semester. Let's jump straight in. What's the results? Let's have a look. Let's find out what kind of audience we've got. Oh, wow. Nearly half of our attendees are a cheese and cracker type person. I didn't give you an option if there's a glass of wine with that, but I'm going to assume some of you there will be. And about a quarter of our audience are chocolate chip cookie people. So what I'm going to suggest to you is get to know your audience, because in my experience, when you're dealing with teachers, a packet of biscuits is an incredibly powerful negotiating tool. All right. Let's get straight into it, guys. So this is the reasonable adjustment training that we delivered across TAFE Queensland. A huge amount of interest from educators, some very new to the sector, and many who've actually been teaching for many, many years, because the cohort seems to be changing. there seems to be a lot more students with support needs, a lot more disclosure, and it seems to be more complex. So we start off by simply clarifying for people that very simple definition, that a reasonable adjustment is simply a measure or an action that's taken to assist a student with disability to participate on the same basis as students without the disability. And off the back of that, very important that everybody in the organisation understands, and this does not just belong to disability practitioners and officers, that reasonable adjustment applies to the entire process. It applies to the point of inquiry about what the organisation offers, inquiry about what courses are available. So it's prior to enrolment. So from that point of inquiry through the enrolment process, reasonable adjustment should be considered in curriculum design, and it also extends to all the other facilities and services that are available on our campuses and through our organisations. And reasonable adjustment must be based on the individual's needs and abilities. So no assumptions to be taken. But those needs and abilities are also then balanced with the interests of all the other stakeholders. So we are talking about balancing the needs and interests of not just the student and their associate or support person, but the interests of the larger university or training provider, the interests and the needs of the staff, the delivery staff, and of other learners. And that's very important because that leads into an extended conversation about the context of the training program. So the DDA, the Disability Discrimination Act, it's nearly 30 years old, but the underlying principles are absolutely still relevant, and of course it is still absolutely the overarching piece of legislation. And like any piece of legislation, it is incredibly lengthy, full of lots of difficult to understand paragraphs and terminology for the average staff member and student, quite frankly, who do not have the time to look at that. So that's why we have the Disability Standards for Education, which came about in 2005, so nearly 20 years old themselves. And I've always found it useful just to have copies of that, and there's a link in the presentation to those fact sheets that really just summarise nice and clearly what our obligations are as education and training providers. So if that's not a resource you've got, you really should have those available to your staff. Make sure they're on your intranets, because it really is just about making sure that those obligations are understood. And really where we go from there is just to walk our educators and our trainers through some of those. Now the terminology in here, we'll talk about RTOs. They are registered training organisations. That's a VET term, but it can apply equally in the university space. So those standards, the disability standards for education, are really about ensuring that we take action to ensure that people with disability have the opportunity to equal access to our education and training opportunities. And it also makes it unlawful for us to refuse admission to a course on the basis that the individual may be unlikely to gain employment because of their disability. Now, as an organisation as TAFE Queensland, employment is very strongly promoted through all of our industry training, as you would expect. But we're not the gatekeepers to industry and employment, and it's not for us to make assumptions about what may happen in the future. We'd absolutely take into account what we're training the individual for, but we're not going to assume what employment opportunities there might be. So we are obligated, all of us, no matter what your organisation is, you are absolutely obligated to make a reasonable adjustment if you know that an adjustment is required. At the same time, we need to be clear, and we need to ensure that our students are clear and our educators, that reasonable adjustment, it cannot bridge a gap in that learner's capacity. So it's not going to bridge a level that actually requires further study or a pathway that will lead to an end point through levels of learning. And the Disability Discrimination Act does not require us as institutions and organisations to deliver services that we're not in the business of providing. And a very recent example for that would be a conversation I had with a parent who was adamant that we should be providing transportation for their daughter to get to a TAFE campus. And we simply just had to explain, well, we don't provide transport for any students. That's not the nature of our business. Well, of course, we can give you some helpful information about your transport options and who you can talk to, but that's not for us to provide. It's not in our day-to-day operations. So one of the key questions that we wanted to sort of work through with our staff was really about, so when do you apply reasonable adjustment? And at the same time, when don't you? So we just clarify for our educators, because not everybody's confident in this space and not everybody is going to feel confident to ask, that, you know, you actually don't have to apply reasonable adjustment just because a person has a disability. And it's actually only needed where it's required and where it's in the context of the educational training package. And I'll touch on that a little bit more shortly. Very important to understand that adjustments are not about giving advantage, far from it. It's about giving the student the opportunity to access and to participate. It's most definitely not about changing course standards. And it says very clearly that it's not about guaranteeing success. So reasonable adjustment is absolutely about enabling the individual to take part. That leads us then to about, well, we're not required to make unreasonable adjustments and upholding the integrity of the qualification. That's absolutely got to be maintained for the benefit of all students and for the benefit of the organisation and the validity, if you like, of the actual qualification. And it's really important to give educators and lecturers examples, show them what reasonable adjustment is. Because many of them will be applying reasonable adjustment in their teaching, in their delivery, and in their assessment processes. They just won't necessarily consider it reasonable adjustment. So it's as simple as enabling somebody to have some extra time for good reason, to read through learning resources. When you put a piece of software maybe on a computer network or for an individual, that is a reasonable adjustment. It can be very, very straightforward. It does not have to be complicated. Now, in the VET space, so in vocational education and training, and I appreciate it's a little different in the university space, we actually have standards for registered training organisations, which are quite separate to the disability standards for education. And what I say to staff is, whether you're talking about the DDA, the standards for disability, or the standards for registered training organisations, or indeed whether you're talking about universal design or inclusive learning frameworks, if you get the basics right of reasonable adjustment, you'll cover all of this. Because reasonable adjustment, quite frankly, is just part of inclusive teaching and learning practices. And there is a document that's available on the ADCET website, which is it's a Queensland document, but it's called Reasonable Adjustments, a Guide for VET Practitioners. That's been a very useful document just to show people, look, here are the examples. This is how simple reasonable adjustment can be. It does not mean that you have to do everything for every student that's in this guide. Far from it. Keep it really simple. And again, give them examples, show them what it actually is. Now, interestingly, You'll have staff in your organisations that have actually worked there for many, many years. You may have staff that work right alongside your disability support team. They might even be within the wider student support area, but they actually don't really know what the process is for students at your organisation. And this will extend to faculty administration staff. It'll extend to all your lecturers and teachers. Don't assume that they know. And it's really important that they do understand the basic process of how students can disclose and share relevant information about a disability, because they're going to have conversations with other people in your organisation, and those other people need to be able to answer confidently, and they should know this as well. So we actually talk all of the staff through what happens. So we explain to them that at the point of enrolment, when the student is enrolling in their course and all their units, they are actually asked the question, regardless of how they enrol, face-to-face, over the phone, online, they're asked the question if they have a disability and whether they'd like to receive information about the services that are available. This is a really good opportunity to make it clear to the teaching staff and the wider organisation that, of course, many students do not disclose their disability at enrolment, and they don't have to. It is a personal choice. They are under no obligation to share that at enrolment, and there'll be lots of different reasons for that. It can be a simple case of that's just very personal for that student, and they don't know the organisation, and they don't want to share that. Maybe they just feel that, you know what, I don't want to tell anyone, and I just want to give it a go, and I want people to treat me for being me. Maybe they've had some very poor experiences either in a high school or some other organisation, and they just thought, you know what, I'm not going to do this. And maybe they're just not sure, and they'd rather not. So as much as we encourage people to share information, there is absolutely no obligation to do so. However, the student can disclose their disability support needs at any time during their studies. And if that happens to be their last term, the last week of their course, that is a decision that they make. However, you're not responsible for applying any reasonable adjustments retrospectively, and nor is your organisation. So that really sits with the individual. Then we talk staff through what happens. So if a student then wants to register with the service at TAFE Queensland, our disability support services, we call them AccessAbility services. The word disability as a term is throughout all of our literature. It's just the title of the service is called AccessAbility. And we explain to people, look, what happens is the student comes in and they can sit down and have a one-to-one conversation with an experienced disability practitioner about themselves as an individual. And that's really simply about whether the disability or the learning difficulty is likely to have an impact on that person's ability to participate and take part in the chosen training program or course of study. It's important to remind a lot of staff as well, of course, that there are many, many students with disability who enrol who do not need our services, who are perfectly independent. Some of them just say, you know what, I can advocate for myself, thanks. That's a really good thing. And again, it's a personal choice. We remind staff through our organisation that, of course, the student may bring a support person. That could be the parents, it could be an external support agency, it could be a support worker funded through the NDIS that they employ themselves directly. And then we just make it clear to the staff that as long as we have that student's consent, and 99.9% of the time we do, the student is happy to send some information out via that disability officer to their teachers and to their industry trainers. It simply gives some background help bring them up to speed. And those conversations, of course, with the students are as much about, look, your teachers are going to have a huge intake of new people. What are you comfortable sharing? What do they need to know so that you can get the most out of this relationship? What would you like me to know if I was going to be your teacher and trainer helping you through this training package? I find that going through the process that your organisation has to be very, very useful. And I've been amazed at how many people I've known for years who said, oh, I didn't realise that's what we did. So don't assume that people will know. This next section that we cover in the training, I think, is incredibly important. The cohort of students has changed significantly in recent years. For those of you who've been around for a few years, you'll be well aware that particularly over the last 4, 5, 6 years, we're seeing this incredible, frightening growth in mental ill health in the student population. And it's really important to recognise that. And it's important for educational staff, I think, to see the organisation recognising that it is changing, because it can be quite challenging as a teacher, as a practitioner, delivering the course. We also acknowledge, if it's relevant in your organisation, and it has been in ours over the years, we've always had a significant number of students on the autism spectrum. That does seem to be increasing. And we also have acknowledged, and I think this has been very much appreciated by the teaching staff, that, some years ago, we used to really go out of our way and talk to students about the importance of disclosure, and you must talk to us because we don't have any information. There are days when it feels it's gone completely the other way, where students more than ever are incredibly open in their disclosure, and it's often in the classrooms and the training facilities for their teachers, incredibly open about sharing very personal and often very challenging and quite confronting information about their backgrounds, about their personal welfare situations, and also the complexity and coexisting concerns. And again, when you think about a teacher or a trainer who's got a huge intake of new students, that suddenly puts you in this position of, what am I doing here? I used to have 2 or 3 or 4 students in a class with support needs. It now feels actually that it's more than half the class. That's a challenge, and it is a challenge for a teacher. And we note that a number of students are sharing that information, and yet there's not always actually a diagnosis, either mental health or specific learning difficulties. It's a really important acknowledgement, I think, for your educators and your lecturers. And so is this. What we sometimes see, and it doesn't just belong to disability officers or to student services, is a change in the demands and the expectations. Now, I think this is across the entire student population, but I've certainly been in those conversations, and sometimes with parents who detail an incredible background. It's quite challenging, should we say. And then it's, okay, so they're with you now for 2 semesters and you'll get them through. And you're like, hang on a minute. You've just given me all of this, and I'm actually just going to try and get you through a training package. I myself have had those conversations when somebody's just said to me, well, why doesn't your organisation do ABC? Why don't you do this? I've been in those situations where a parent has said, well, we've paid for the course, why hasn't he passed? And you may well have had those conversations, and you will in the future, where as soon as you've said hello to someone, they immediately say, under the DDA, and I try not to react to that, and I just think, okay, this is what they've come in with, what's their expectation. And that really leads us into something else that we should recognise. For many of our students, and I also say for their parents, a lot of them, not everybody, but a lot of people, and I know it's a generalisation, but a lot of people have had years and years of battles and obstacles to have to fight through just to have a disability or a learning difficulty diagnosed. And quite frankly, each time they go to a new place or when they move from one place to another, they're already starting out, oh, here we go again. And it's actually quite understandable when it's been such a difficult journey. So it is a transition, not just for the students, but also for the parents as well. And if they're school leavers, well, guess what? They've not been in our system before. They've not had our experiences. They don't have that knowledge yet. So they're going to go through those perfectly normal transition stages. And sometimes I'll just say, look, they're on their own place. They're learning. So, we just got to give them a chance. And you'll have seen this, and that term helicopter parents, when you're sat in a room with a parent and a brand new student, and you're looking at the student and you're asking the student, or you're chatting to them, and mom or dad is answering every single thing. And it can be a little frustrating, but it's a transition, and I think that's important to recognise. So coming back to the teachers now, for your lecturers, this is really important, and I was quite concerned that many of our teachers weren't across this. So if you are applying reasonable adjustment, you need to document that as a teacher, as an educator. Do your staff know that? Because in my role currently as a mental health and wellbeing manager, I've actually attended a lot of new teacher orientations just to get a sense of what they cover. Boy, oh boy, do they cover some processes, and it feels like hundreds of different templates and procedures, and it's quite overwhelming. So show them what they need to do. This can, of course, be led by the faculty, but we can play our part. Where do they actually record reasonable adjustments that they are applying? For us at TAFE Queensland, it's on the individual assessment tasks. That's where it should be recorded. Quite brief, quite simple, but acknowledging on the assessment task that an adjustment has been applied and what it is. Was it 30 minutes in an exam? Was it an alternative assessment? Was it a verbal assessment? Whatever it might be, quite simple. You don't need the student's history, their background on there, their personal welfare situation. That's not required. What's the adjustment that's been applied? To continue on from that, of course, it is about making sure that the teachers feel more confident that, yes, the student must still be able to demonstrate that they have the skills and knowledge that's absolutely required in that particular unit of study and in the context of that program. So it's really just confirming with people that, yes, reasonable adjustment, no problem. Does it enable the student to demonstrate their skills? If so, great. Does it dilute or take away anything from the integrity of the assessment? If you feel that it does, you need to talk that through. One of the examples that we used was we run a whole range of hundreds of training programs, but we used a simple example where we said, look, we had a student who had a very, very significant dyslexia, very bright young man, and boy, oh boy, did he study, and he had to do all that extra study, that extra effort that was incredibly tiring physically and mentally, for all this new terminology around anatomy and physiology and working with clients in the gym and coaching clients. And when it came to doing a lot of those exams, particularly around the anatomy and physiology in that particular fitness course, the absolute battle that was all the reading and writing in those assessments, it was a simple case that in agreement with the student and the teachers, we said, why don't you just verbally assess him? Does he actually need to have to write down and spell correctly all of this terminology? Does he have to be able to read it all? It seems it's such a laborious exercise, and yet the teachers were already saying, we know he knows it. Verbally assess this guy. and he can pass with flying colours, and he did. Now, to make a comparison, if we took one of our nursing students, the context is different, because the nursing student in their role does actually need to be able to read and write to a satisfactory level anatomy and physiology, which would be at a different level, but in the context of nursing. So there are some differences. And that just gives you teachers things to think about. Again, it comes back to the context and what is it that we're trying to achieve. The next thing that we touch on, and we are going to have some time for Q&A, and I'm sure there's some comments in the chat. We've never sort of been overly precious about the language. I'm sure we've all had those moments when we've heard somebody say something, whether it's in the workplace or out there in our social lives, that make you think, oh, that's not good. And interestingly, when we were putting this particular training together, there was one staff member that keeps saying, oh yeah, wheelchair bound. And I thought, oh, didn't we get rid of this 20 years ago? So I just weaved this into the training, because again, if it's not your world and it's not your space, you know, you can forgive people, but then give them the opportunity to change. Actually, why don't you just say, Sarah uses a wheelchair, if that's what you need to say. I remember a colleague of mine 20 or more years ago hearing somebody say wheelchair bound, and he just said, are they tied to it? Then let's stop using that term. What I've got on the bottom half of that slide that you can hopefully see there is about being aware of the health and safety trap. And this is actually something that probably should have a slide of its own. What we sometimes see is when a teacher or a trainer is presented with a situation that maybe they're not that familiar with, that they've not had a student with a particular support need or a learning support need, particularly in a lot of those physical tasks, you sometimes hear, we can't do that. It's a health and safety issue. And it tends to be a bit of a go-to that makes the person saying it feel a bit better. Yeah, it's not actually me. It's a health and safety issue. Rarely is that actually the case. What's really being said is, I actually don't know how that can be done. And you know what? I'm just going to run with health and safety. Rarely is it the case. What tends to happen is it's thrown out there too easily without the key thing that's required. And that key thing is consultation with the student. Has there been some consultation and some really honest, open conversation that's constructive about, okay, so we've got this particular assessment task. And this is the skill and the knowledge and what we need in terms of participation. How are we going to go about that? How can we work with this? And it doesn't mean that you always have one person who will come up with the answer, because no one person is the expert. You've got to involve the student because it's about them. You've got to involve them because consultation is absolutely part of the disability standards for education. If you don't involve them, you're missing the key person with all the skills and knowledge. So consultation, because it gets thrown around still, and rarely is health and safety a reason to stop somebody participating. Yes, there will be occasions when something cannot be achieved, but more often than not, there's a solution. We put this in because huge growth in the number of support workers employed by students and families, support workers that are NDIS funded. And I don't know about you guys, but we're seeing a huge increase in the number of support workers attending our campuses. We all expected that would happen. And there were some fairly predictable challenges in that it's almost an army of support workers, all very keen, all very enthusiastic, many of whom are incredibly good at what they do, are incredibly supportive of their clients, And unfortunately, that brings with it many support workers who are incredibly unqualified, have very little experience, and are somewhat blissfully unaware that when they're on our campuses, they are actually in an industry training facility, where the professional standards and expectations don't just apply to the student, they actually apply to the support staff themselves. So we have a little guide, a little 2-page guide that any staff member can provide to an external support person and say, hey, you might find this useful. It encourages them to look at the course guide and information that the student that they're supporting is working with, just to help them understand, hey, here's the student rules, here's our expectations of dress code and behaviour, because we have had to have a conversation more than once where we've had support personnel turn up on our classrooms literally dressed like they're going to the beach. And we've had to say that that's not good enough. This is the expectation for our students, so this is what we require from you. And we have had conversations with some of those external support staff and have had to ask them to be a little less enthusiastic, that they're getting in, they're participating in the assessment tasks, and they're very keen to answer questions that the teacher's asking, blissfully unaware that we actually need you to just sit back, support your client to participate, but you're not actually doing the course. So, you know, and sometimes it's just a lack of experience. On the whole, though, many have been very, very good. So we put that guide together because that was very useful. And it was also something that the teaching staff could refer to. So look, when we talk about some tips really to wrap this up, it's quite straightforward, but it's about giving your colleagues confidence, reassuring people that no one person is an expert. Not every teacher has taught every student with a disability. So don't go it alone. Don't make any assumptions. Absolutely talk to your teaching colleagues. I've got a student with this particular support need, or look, I've got this information. How would you go about that? That's really important. Ensure there has been consultation with the student and monitor that adjustment. Talk to them. How's it going? Is it working? And if it isn't, you need to stop, identify why, and then review that. The other thing is, particularly in our organisation, the information that we send out to teachers when a student agrees for us to do so, sending out the background of disability that's relevant, that's not actually required in our organisation for a teacher to have a conversation with a student about reasonable adjustment. The teacher is the person who's qualified, who's managing the training, who's carrying out the assessments. The student does not need to have registered with disability support. They can just have a conversation, teacher and student. And just reminding people that, you know, reasonable adjustment is very much about enabling the participation stage. Monitor that as it goes, but it's absolutely not guaranteeing a person to be successful. It doesn't work like that. Where we're doing everything we can to ensure that you participate and that you can grow and learn as a student. So look, I know that's a little bit of information. I'm conscious of the time, so I think we're going to try and look at a few different questions, maybe, Darlene. I can see something flashing in the corner of my screen, so I don't know if we're looking at chat as well.
Yep. Hi, great. Thank you, Brandon, for that. If people have questions for Brandon, please add them to the chat box and I'll ask, or if you're feeling confident, I don't know if I'll be able to keep an eye on all the hands because there's so many people here, but we'll put your video on and I can throw to you for questions. Just in the chat box, the NDIS slide got a bit of the discussion going, Brandon, around the intersectionality between education and NDIA. So I've added a resource in there, our pre-planning toolkit, which is for students, but it actually breaks down the 8 disability types and actually identifies in there what NDIS should fund and what the training provider should fund. So if people go to those resources, hopefully that will help you unpack it. We do have some issues. Planners and local area coordinators often think that we are mainstream services, and then they think, oh, we don't need to fund anything, and that's not correct. So people do have a battle on their hands at times, but the NDCO program is working with NDIA to hopefully improve the knowledge and expertise of the planners and the LACs to improve the situation for students with disability. Now, Helen, you've put your hand up. I don't know if you want to put your mic on and ask your question. Helen Thomas, or maybe your...
Hello.
Hi, Helen. Yeah, we can.
I might be on a bit loud, everyone. Is that okay?
That's okay. It's fine.
The last slide you had up. And thanks, Brandon. That information's fantastic. I think there's a lot of secondary schools that could do with your slide set there. Yeah, just that last slide. It was really in reference to students with gaps, so not formally diagnosed. It was just to clarify, I haven't got the last screen, but the last slide, but it was to do around, as we know, teachers can make reasonable adjustments themselves. So that one, a teacher does not need a student outline or support letter from Accessibility Services to make a reasonable adjustment, because we're finding now the gap, the students with the significant gaps, so they're not diagnosed. So would you encourage teachers to develop that, obviously in consultation with teachers and students, that mindset of that you actually can go ahead to enable the student?
Yeah, it's a funny space, isn't it? Because I think people get a little scared in that area. And what I'll say to teachers is simply this: remember that a huge proportion of students and who have a disability do not disclose at enrolment. They are going to be in your classes. If through that relationship there's a conversation where that student shares some information, or just as a teacher that you realise something's not quite gelling with the student, they're not quite getting this, and there's a conversation, that's a really good thing, because that's about rapport and trust. And I would say to that teacher, encourage that student to talk to student support. Let them know that student support is there, and it's not going to change anything in your course. And that student may still not want to engage with us. Some of those students that we've seen will then present some evidence of their disability directly to the teacher. And you know what? Yes, that's okay. As a former teacher, there's some very simple reasonable adjustments that you can apply in individual tasks that are simply about inclusive learning. We're not making huge changes. If it's a little bit of extra reading time, or there's absolutely no reason why a teacher can't verbally assess all of the students in the class. And I think it's just knowing that those options are available.
Thanks, Brandon. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Brandon. Now, I've been a bit prolific in the chat box and providing lots of links to the information we have around NDIS as well. So for those who are new to ADCET, please go on ADCET, www.adcet.edu.au. There's lots of resources around reasonable adjustments, around NDIS and the intersectionality. And Brandon's presentation and recording will also be up there. So the website has a wealth of information, and hopefully the search engine will help take you to where you need to be. So we have a couple of questions we got prior to the presentation, Brandon, and so I might go through those unless...
Sure.
Actually, there is a couple of questions, but I'll just go to one around around inherent requirements or core competency, which is what some, often people within the vet sector use, and kind of in relation to reasonable adjustments, kind of, unpacking the inherent requirements or the core competencies. What are some of the issues or hints or tips that you could give us as a sector around that?
All right. Well, I think I've been around long enough to remember Trevor Allen presenting at a Pathways conference some years ago, the IROM project, which was about inherent requirement statements for nursing, if I recall that correctly. So look, in the vet sector, what we've got is a student will get a qualification guide, which essentially is the big picture of the course as a whole. Then within that, you'll have unit study guides, and I imagine that's very similar for the higher ed space. And then we go right down to the task assessment sheets. which says exactly what it is that you're actually going to be assessed for and the criteria that you will be assessed against. So reasonable adjustment can absolutely be applied that enables the student then to meet the inherent requirements or to meet the competency statements. And there's questions for me are really around, what's the intention of the activity? What's the learning outcome that we're looking for here? And is it reasonable in the context of that activity? And of course, we've got to give that information to the students as well to make sure they've got that kind of information, whether it's inherent requirement statements, whether it's the competency statements within their unit guides and assessment tasks, because only can they then make some informed decisions themselves. So reasonable adjustment can absolutely support the student to meet the inherent requirements.
One question someone asked, and I haven't responded in the chat, but it was around insurance and relating to the support workers. How is TAFE, or as a manager, previous manager,
Sure.
have people ask that question?
Look, in terms of external support people coming onto your premises, it's a question that I'd encourage you to actually ask your facilities, people who actually coordinate the site. Because I'd heard that for many years. It's an insurance risk. It's an insurance issue. And I was confidently told that actually that's nonsense. Our TAFE campuses are open facilities. Yeah, you can walk into most campuses. You don't need a swipe card to walk through the main gate. And as part of your general operating as like any other business, like any other restaurant, shopping centre, people can come in, and should be an incident, there'll be all kinds of, public liability insurance and everything that goes with it. I think that insurance response is a little bit of a myth. You should probably talk to your own organisations about that. We have a policy at TAFE Queensland that people who are not enrolled, so if you're not enrolled in the course, you cannot sit in the classroom. That is our policy. Because firstly, people who aren't enrolled in the course don't have any business to be in the classroom. The exception is, of course, if that person is a verified support person and they're more than able to attend. It's also in our policy because we don't want parents thinking they can just rock up and be the support to their son or daughter, when in fact they need to just start transitioning off. We're not a high school.
Yeah, that's great. Good advice. If anybody's got any more questions, please put up your hand and turn your mic on, or ask it in the chat box. You certainly talked about reasonable adjustments, throughout the presentation, but I think some of the challenges that we have is really unpacking, and I know you talked about this a little bit more, but we haven't had any more questions, so I'm filling a little bit of time. But one of the questions we did have previously was, who decides what is reasonable? And you talked about, that conversation you need to have with your teachers and you as a practitioner, and unpack that. But just want to have a little bit more of a conversation around that.
Yeah, look, absolutely. There is no doubt in my experience that sometimes an individual will come in with a wish list of every conceivable adjustment that they would like applied in their learning. And I sometimes think it's a product of the fact that they've gone through a full diagnosis, a process, or frankly, they've had to battle so hard to get that diagnosis. That piece of paper listing those accommodations or adjustments is very valuable and very personal to that individual. So of course, some people are going to hold that up front and center and say, you will do this because it's been confirmed. It's simply about having those conversations around, okay, what might have applied here will change, will evolve, because this is where you are now and the context may have changed. Maybe it all applies. It depends on the context. And particularly in our organisation, we're training people to either go into employment or into higher education. It's also about informing people. You know what, you've progressed now from high school. You're in a slightly different environment and you're going to transition. A lot of those adjustments will evolve and change over time as well. because ultimately, where possible, we want to reduce that personal support and replace it with something more independent, a technology-based solution or something that the individual can manage, if that is applicable, because of course it isn't always the case. It comes back down to conversations. Ultimately, it's for us as the organisation to make a confirmation of what's actually going to be reasonable, but do the consultation. If you have not consulted in that process, you're falling short of the disability standards.
Okay. Just further to that, we've had a question around like how can staff know that an adjustment wouldn't be offered in a workplace, for example, like oral assessments are required more and more in courses. However, in a workplace, if an employer suddenly lost the ability to communicate orally, adjustments may be made. Yeah, so some people are often arrogant to understand, you know, that you won't be able to get those adjustments in a workplace versus you can get them in education.
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing challenge, isn't it? And I know a few people have asked about industry accreditation, saying that you must be able to do ABC, when in actual fact, a lot of us would say, we can actually get there, but via a slightly alternative pathway. Look, I think it's a moving feast, Darlene. There's no one single answer that I can give to that.
No, it's a challenge, isn't it?
But what works best is the examples, and this is where ADCET and our networks are really, really very powerful. Share examples of what's worked. We often talk about when things are problematic and we don't know what to do. Share what works with each other.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And Helen, you've got your hand up. I might just throw over to you for the last question if you wanted to unmute, or is that from last time? Helen Thomas?
I'm here.
Yes, good.
2 questions. If I forget it, one of them's about a template, but the accessibility rather than disability, that's the term you're using where you are, Brandon, is that correct?
Yes, that's the name of the service. That's
fantastic. I love it. Do students recognise, did that take a bit of work to get to a recognition level that, because we struggle, well, we're new on the team and my colleague and I struggle a little bit with the term disability, not that we're as a team title. Is the accessibility working? Does that people are drawn to it and understand?
I'd love to be able to say, Helen, that we were the first people to do that. We weren't. I'm pretty sure, and somebody may correct me, I think JCU were one of the first that changed the name of its disability services.
Right.
And I put that out some years ago to a whole host of students who used our services, and that was one of the options that we gave, in addition to what would make you a little bit more likely to sort of come and talk to us. And the overwhelming feedback, it wasn't hundreds of students, but I'm going to say across maybe 30 or 40 students with disability at that time, across a range of programs, and 9 out of 10 were like, oh, accessibility, that's so much better.
Awesome. Yeah.
And I think it was part of, again, that transition. You know, it made them feel good. But the term disability, it's in all the literature. It's just not the title. It doesn't change anything in how people search for your services on the web. And it was very well received.
Great, thank you. And just very quickly, with is there a place or platform we can share templates? Like you said, you have a process that you follow, which aligns pretty much with what we do, but I'd love to be able to share, for example, we have a personal success plan or personalised success plan for students, which is information gathering. Is there an opportunity to share those sort of really, they're just simple things, but they make a world of difference?
Good question, Darlene. Can that be done through the website or through the Ofsted list? How does that tend to work?
Yep, no, definitely, if that's
and it
okay.
can be reciprocated, just thought I'd put that out there, but thanks very much.
No, that's great. And look, the question, we've reached the end, so I apologise for going a little bit over time, but the question around accessibility and disability is a really big question. I know we've been grappling at it here at the University of Tasmania. There is a lot of pride in the word disability for many in the disability community. So I think organisations or institutions have to tread carefully, because a lot of people with disability have fought long and hard, and that culture is changing. And also ableism is something that's certainly kind of being researched quite extensively, and the word accessibility may be seen with a capital A as quite ableist. So it is a challenging thing, and I'd love to get confident, and hopefully I will and soon, to actually have some of these provocation questions and have some sessions with us all to kind of actually unpack all these issues, because I think there's some hot topics for us in the sector, and I think that's one of them. So, so it's great to have actually had that conversation today. All right, we're well and truly over time. Thank you, Brandon, so much. We didn't get to the 2 poll questions, but we'll talk about it in the survey. A survey will go out to you, so please fill it in. The feedback has been absolutely great on the chat, Brandon, and once again, we could listen to you for many hours on with your shared wisdom. So thank you for giving us your time and sharing your wisdom with us.
Absolute pleasure.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us. It was great to have you all join us today. Take care.
Have a great day. Thank you all.